I'm in. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And there's so many folks here who are not here for the first time. So it's lovely to see you again. And thanks for continuing to support our programming. And then I gather, I think I'm seeing more than a few new faces too. So this today's today's session is part of our what we call Peacemaker Circle format. And for the most part, we try to do one of these a week. Sometimes we do two. And we've been doing these now, just coming up on 5 years. I started 5 years ago, and some of you have heard the story. I'll keep it short. My predecessor said, well, you're going to need to do a monthly membership meeting. And I said, okay, well, I'm good at that stuff. I can do it. What do you do? Well, you talk about what's going on with the organization and so forth. And I did it. I did it one time and was bored senseless. And I thought, if anyone else is as bored with this as I am, I'm never doing this again. It's either this or remove my fingernails with needle nose pliers. So I thought, let's do something else. Let's have people who are more interesting than me come and be guests. And Zen Peacemakers, as a lot of you know, we, around the circle that surrounds us, we touch a lot of different topical areas. It could be war and peace. It could be racism or gender issues or end of life, refugees, the environment, the arts, pure dharma or pure spiritual teaching, any number of things like that. And so we started having guests come in and kind of move us around the circle. And it's been fun. And for anybody who doesn't know, on the website, under the media pull down, are all the videos for every one of these that we've done where at least all the ones where I didn't forget to turn the camera on. And there's a couple of those, so you won't be able to see those. But there are several hundred videos on the website of all of these. So if you're ever inclined, they should be relatively easily searchable. And you can go back and find, Norman Fisher or Jane Hirschfield or, on and on and on. There's some really good ones out there. So anyway, and today's will be as well. I'm so delighted to welcome our friend Hillary Giovale from down in Flagstaff, Arizona, and which is that way from me on the other side of the mountains. And we were just chatting. I like to call it the green room. It makes us sound like we're bigger than we are, but we were just chatting in the green room a little bit about where we lived and wildfire, and we have that in common. We both have if not go bags, at least lists for evacuating during fires, and both mountain dwellers. And Hillary's here to talk about the title of her talk or of the section is Truth, Healing, and Repair as a pathway to peace. Forgive me if I seem distracted because I'm still the doorman here too. So, and I don't think the title really tells the story here completely. So yeah, Hillary's going to do that for us. But Hillary's a writer, an educator, an activist, and has really spent years and years investigating, looking into her role, my role. Maybe not all of us here, but many of our roles as colonizers, enslavers, let's say, and the privileged walking on someone else's land, and what we do about that now in 2025. How do we countenance that? We can't go back in history, but what do we do? So I'm not going to. You didn't come to listen to me, so I'm going to continue to be the doorman, and I will pass the talking stick, as it were, to Hillary. And thank you all once again for coming, and thank Hillary for being here to share for a beautiful walk with us. So, Hillary, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Geoff. And thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really grateful to be with you all today and, just have this conversation that's always been important, but feels even more important at the moment that we find ourselves in right now. And I want to especially say hi to Elder Louise Dunlap, who is such a dear soul to me and actually has been a pioneer in this genre that I have written as well. She has a book called Inherited Silence. And yeah, elders are very important in this work, and Louise is one of the important elders in my life. So I just want to honor you, Louise. And um, I want to share with you that I'm sitting in my home office, and I'm sitting on land that is the traditional homelands of Hopi, Havasupai, Dene, Apache, Pueblo, Yavapai, and other nations. Um, right over my left shoulder here is a sacred mountain of kinship. And this mountain is a volcano. She is known by all the indigenous people of this region as a sacred being. What I've been told is that she's a grandmother. She's a grandmother being, and she's a being of kinship and of relations, of right relations. And I've lived here for over 30 years. I moved here as a college freshman in the 90s. um, and, when I moved here, I had been brought up as a middle-class white person. I had no idea about the concept of sacred landscape. I had never heard of that concept in my life. And I've come to learn in the years since that sacred landscape, sacred features of the land teach you and guide you. They inform us whether we're aware or not. That's what many of my indigenous friends here have told me, is that this mountain has been teaching me even before I was aware of who she is and what she does. And so I want to also thank her as an elder. She is an elder and she is a teacher as well, for me. And I don't think any of this work I'm going to share with you today would have come about if I hadn't been sitting at the foot of this being, honestly. So, that's kind of the foundation on which all of this, everything I can share with you rests on that foundation today. And I can share with you that, there have been many doorways into this work for me. There have been many different entry points where I chose to get on this path. And one of the entry points took place on the last day of 2015. It was New Year's Eve. And at that point, I had been starting to build relationships with some of the indigenous people in my community and in this region. And I had started developing a curiosity at that time about, wow, there's really something that they have going on in their culture that feels super magnetic to me. I'm very interested. I'm drawn to this other way of being. I'm drawn to these ceremonies. I'm drawn to these other cultures, but I don't belong to these cultures at all. And I haven't been brought up in them, and I don't have the skills to be part of these cultures, but yet I'm somehow drawn and magnetized. So I was kind of in that state of curiosity and asking and wondering. And on the last night of 2015, I went to visit my parents, and I was starting to think about my own ancestors. And at that time, that was really the beginning of that inquiry for me, because I was brought up white, and one aspect of whiteness is that we tend to not think about our past. We tend not to think about our ancestors at all. We tend to often think of ourselves as individuals who are completely separate from the past and from our forebears, And so that inquiry about my own ancestors was beginning, and my mom gave me a book of family genealogy that was written by my great uncle. It had been sitting in the closet for years. And I opened it that night, and open right away. I saw that I was descended from a man who came to North Carolina from the Scottish Highlands in 1739. He was present at a meeting 2 years after his arrival, a meeting that was, the purpose of that meeting was to basically declare the right of the settlers to take up land. So he was right there 2 years upon arrival asserting his right to take up land. His grandfather, or sorry, his grandson, inherited a plantation and an enslaved man in the will of a family friend. And then that grandson went down to Mississippi. He walked to Mississippi with a group of 13 other people. And in Mississippi, he enslaved people and his descendants enslaved people. So all of that was in that book. And I realized as well in that book that I am a 9th generation descendant of that immigrant from 1739. And all of a sudden, that evening, the colonial history of the United States came crashing down on me like a ton of bricks, because somehow I had been able to, up until that night, I had been able to somehow rationalize that, oh, well, my family just came here much more recently, because I had on one side of my family, the people who came from Northern Ireland in that case were much more recent. They immigrated to Canada in the 1800s, right? In the late 1800s. And so that was the narrative that I had told myself. And that was the narrative that had been supported by everything around me. By white culture, by all the stories of friends and family and church and community and school and everything, all of my social conditioning had supported that myth that this has nothing to do with me. This colonial narrative is not part of my story. And I and my family and my ancestors are all innocent. That was the narrative that I had been carrying around unconsciously. And then, of course, reading that book of family genealogy just completely blew that out of the water. And so it was a very stark moment for me. And it caused what I now realize was a spiritual crisis, And I went home after that trip, and I was so full of shame, so full of remorse. I couldn't look people in the eye. I was horrified. I was afraid of people finding out. And I didn't know how to hold myself and conduct myself any longer, knowing that I descend from colonizers and enslavers. And so I went out to the land here and this mountain here. And as I spent time on the land, there was a lot of snow that winter. I would go out in my snow pants and I would lie down in the snow and I would sob and put my face down in the snow and let the tears pour into the snow. And over time, that practice of letting all of that emotion move through began to teach me something. And the teaching that came through was, you are the first generation that has the capacity to look at this and deal with this, and you need to do that. That is the assignment of your lifetime. And so I took that to heart, and I began, first of all, with talking to my husband, my children, my parents, who are, this is the 3 living generations of our family right now. And then eventually that conversation started getting a little bit broader with other groups of people. And I eventually published a book about it that came out in October. And, so that is how this work got started. And it's like I told Geoff before we started the call, this is not necessarily work that someone would choose, because it's very painful. It's painful. There's a lot of grief. there's a lot of shadow material that has to be worked through. It's confronting. I feel like in the years of doing this work, I have had to completely dismantle my personality and put it back together in a different way. I've had to rebuild my sense of identity and purpose. And it's been hard. But in some ways, I feel like this work chose me, and I agreed. I consented when that request was made. And now I couldn't imagine anything more rewarding and anything more healing and anything more joyful. So there's quite a paradox embedded in this work, because it's full of shame and remorse and darkness and regret, and it's also full of liberation and joy and healing. So maybe I'll stop there, Geoff, and see if you have any thoughts.
Have a lot. Uh, and I want to steer clear of any kind of overtly political or commentary about our climate in the U.S. today, but it is relevant. It is relevant. There's a real strain of denial and kind of enforced amnesia going on, even in official capacities where school districts are wanting to protect the fragility of children learning about the Holocaust or about, you know, cultural genocide or enslavement. And I'll try to form a question here. You and I were chatting about this a little bit, and so much came up. So I try to pick my way through the thoughts. But there is a question in here. Among people, and among good people I know, friends of mine even, white friends of mine who will say, well, I'm not really responsible for that because, as you were referring to earlier, legitimately, my people didn't come here until the end of the 1800s sometime. In my case, I'm almost 100% Irish, and my people all came from Ireland in 1880. So there are people who are quite comfortable saying, well, that's not me. But then from the Buddhist standpoint, perhaps even from the Lakota standpoint, we spend a lot of time with our Lakota elders for the retreat that we do in the summertime. We are all related, and we are, if it feels good to say, hey, we're all one man, well, then we are all one man, and that means I'm a perpetrator and I'm a victim. Could you say a little bit about that? I realize that kind of gets off into a little bit of a side street. I hope it's not a cul-de-sac, but if you could maybe say a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we, with compassion and gently, how do we talk to one another and confront that, saying, don't talk to me about Wounded Knee. I don't want to hear about it. I wasn't there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there have been several points along my path where I've had to grapple with that question. And right now, what's coming to me is there are two books that I read along the way that helped me shift my perspective on that. One of them is called The Half Has Never Been Told. It's by Edward Baptist, and it is about how the United States economy from day one was built around the institution of slavery. The economy that we have right now would not exist without the institution of slavery. It's completely intertwined with everything that exists right now. So that was one. The other one was An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And in that, I remember the first time I picked that up, I was looking specifically for information about quote unquote Scots-Irish immigrants, because that's part of my background as well. I had ancestors who lived in Scotland and were sent down to Northern Ireland as part of the colonial program of the British government to take over the land of Irish Catholics and turn them into plantations and enforce settler colonialism in Ireland, right? So I was looking for information about the Scots-Irish in this book by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And what I found was that those folks who came from Scotland to enforce the program of British colonial rule and oppress the Irish became very skilled at that and ended up becoming very successful in the settler colonial program in the United States. And there's a huge number, I can't remember how many. Most of our presidents in the United States are of Scots-Irish descent, at least partially. And so you see how a colonial paradigm that was enforced back hundreds and hundreds of years ago becomes almost part of the DNA of how a people understand themselves and how they operate. And then they can go to an entirely different continent and enact that here with high success. And so when I read those two books, again, my kind of settler myth of innocence started to crumble. And it was very, very painful. I remember like having to set those books down for sometimes years at a time because I couldn't deal with it. It was so confronting, and it created so much cognitive dissonance, right? Because everything in my background and everything around me in white culture was constantly wanting to reinforce, oh no, this is not your problem. You had nothing to do with it. You're innocent. You weren't here. You didn't create those problems. You didn't do that. And yet there was this spiritual imperative coming through all the time that was saying, stay with it. Keep going. Don't turn away. Keep moving through it, you know? And so it was a kind of tug of war internally for a while until I came to the point where I could accept, yeah, I am part of the group of people who have been perpetrators here, and I am continuing to benefit from this economy and from this system of white supremacy and white privilege because I'm walking around in fair skin on this land, you know? And so there was a reckoning process that had to happen, a grappling with that. And now I'm on the other side of that portal, and you know, I think it's one of the most important things that we can do right now, honestly. I was on a call yesterday with a group of people in a circle that I'm co-facilitating, and one of our participants said, this work is radical, especially when you put it in the political context that we're in now, because there is so much pressure to forget now, to sweep it all under the rug, to deny. And so it is a radical act to remember. And it's a radical act to claim one's descent. There's a quote that I love by Aurora Levins Morales about this. Claiming your descent from perpetrators is a radical act because it enables you to transmute that and become part of the solution.
Thank you for that. And in a little bit, maybe we'll shift and start talking about solutions and how we take action and what we can do. But I want to stay on this for just a second longer. And again, Hillary and I talked about this, and I don't want to dominate Hillary, but if I can, I'll just tell this brief story because it really, in a very personal way, this really connects. And maybe you can comment on this. You know, kind of your typical 60s politically radical person. And I've had my judgments about Hiroshima and Nagasaki my whole life. I was born 8 years after that. So how could I be responsible? I grew up in a town in southeastern Washington with great sidewalks, excellent public schools, beautiful parks, well policed, fire departments, public spaces for kids, great place to grow up out in the desert. That was financed entirely by the Manhattan Project through the U.S. government. It was a town that was built overnight by Leslie Groves and the Manhattan Project for the sole purpose of manufacturing the plutonium that was used in Fat Man that we dropped on Nagasaki. I didn't do it. I wasn't born yet. So, and I don't think of myself as just a sympathetic, soft person. So why can't I talk about it without crying? My dad, my uncles, my grandparents, the parents of every kid I knew worked at Hanford. And they created that plutonium that killed tens of thousands of people. And we couldn't talk about it back then. It was an off-limits topic. And until I got to high school and was the editor of an underground newspaper, and we talked about it a lot, and we really pissed people off. But I was the beneficiary of that because I grew up in a place with good schools, and I learned how to spell and how to cipher. And so there's a connection there. And Hillary, I don't know if I mentioned to Hillary, I'm currently looking to meet somebody my age from Nagasaki who grew up there and start a dialogue with them. I don't know exactly to what end, but I want to make that connection. So again, when Hillary and I were talking, I really felt a bond around this feeling. Hillary, I'll mute myself and kind of pass it back to you. I don't know if that is any kind of grist for a comment. But.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just thank you for your tears. Really, because your tears bring my tears. Because this is the world that we're in right now. There has been so much harm done. And we have to cry about it. And crying is not weakness for me. Crying is strength, because these tears, when they come from a story like that, are their medicine. And they enable right action to flow. They enable action to come from the right place. When we feel these things, and that's, I mean, I have a parallel situation that I have had to sit with, which is the understanding that my ancestors for several generations enslaved people in Mississippi, enslaved human beings. And then when one of the great-grandfathers died, there was a dispute over his will. And so there's a court record of all of these enslaved people, John and Eliza and many others, their names listed on these court documents with price tags attached. And, you know, it wasn't until I went to Louisiana, which is where they immigrated after they had enslaved people in Mississippi, and I put offerings down in the graveyard where my ancestors are buried in Louisiana, and then I came back home. It wasn't until after going through that whole cycle that and basically asking those enslaved ancestors to help me. It was like, help me. I know I need to do something, but I don't know what it is yet. And that whole process enabled me to finally feel the wound of the perpetrator that's still in me, because these things, until we deal with them, until we find a way to talk about it, cry about it, and make actions of repair and build relationship. I would say those are the ingredients: relationship, repair, and crying and talking, grieving. Those are the things that enable that wound to finally be addressed. So for me, it was, that process of enslavement started 6 generations ago. It's taken 6 generations because that wound is so deep. It has caused my people to lose a part of their humanity for 6 generations. And I just happen to be in this generation where the capacity has finally developed for us to work on it. It's not just me working on it, it's them too. I feel them with me. I feel them like pulling me forward into that. And so, and many of us have stories like this, many of us have stories of just like Geoff shared. And those stories are so important to tell because they're a gold mine of treasures waiting to be unearthed so that we can finally heal and stop the madness that has been plaguing this world for a long time. So I'll pass it back to you, Geoff.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Maybe at this point, and everybody, thank you for your patience. Let's open up. Let's take a pause here and open up for anyone else who might have a comment or a question or something to share. And a lot of people have their cameras off, so I can't see all your hands. Under React, there's an electronic hand, and if you and Rayron knows how to do this. She's got her hand up. I think. Yeah, there you are. Hi, Rayron. Go ahead. And then David.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Hillary. This is really incredibly important, and it also moves me to tears. Also, I'm not American. I came here in 81 with my husband from Great Britain, and I'm German. So when I was 13, I learned about the Holocaust. And it had been pretty much, put under the rug. My father was 18 when he was taken basically after school. That was in 1939. And he was sent to Russia as a soldier. And he was there the whole war. And he never really recovered. But my parents never talked about it. And then suddenly when I was 13 and somebody said, "You are guilty. You are also guilty of this." And I thought, what, me? How is that possible? And it's the same story. It's really, 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 really painful. And now, of course, I want to support Jewish people. And now Gaza is happening. So how do you make choices? Of course, I understand it's not a choice. It's not a choice. It is just all for humanity. So I am a Buddhist. I'm a Zen priest now, and I'm really working with these things, also feeling very, very strongly about Native people here. And and also Black people, you know, all of this, and we have to work together. So yeah, we need to heal, but I think they have a much greater need to heal. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with me. Yeah. David, did you?
Hello. Thank you, Hillary. I also I need to quickly respond to something that was just said, that they need to heal more. I'm not sure about that. That what I really haven't heard directly, but I am hearing it, is the perpetrator is victim. And I know from just immediate direct family experience that when a family is essentially unknowingly tortured and confused by their connections with family members, connections with the world, connections with different parts of history, and are steeped to some degree in denial and trying to assimilate and erase themselves as much as possible. Well, in my eyes, I don't know if my brother and my sisters would say this, but for me, the consequence in the next generation is that the family was torn apart. And there's very anyhow. So in a sense, the soul of the family has really been struggling and diminished. And the victim part of the perpetrator, to me, is also part of what's going on right now in this country, that it's beyond my capacity of I don't know, I don't even find the words for it. And just the last thing is that I've been so confused for a long time. In the early 70s, I lived in New Mexico for 2 years, and I had the amazing opportunity to visit the Pueblo ceremonies, and I was really touched by a lot of what I experienced. And I, since then, have really struggled with, how do I dare own property when it's stolen? So I've chosen not to. You know, I'm still living on the land, and I rent an apartment, but to me, it's an enormous confusing issue that, among many others, has not been met and worked with as much as it needs to be. And a very quick last thing, when I was in New Mexico, I went with some friends to a historic site and cliff dwellings. And I don't know what it is in terms of what's within my own inner workings, that as we approach the cliff dwellings, which essentially was a tourist site, my friends wanted to climb the area that was the cliff dwelling. And it's very hard for me to talk about this because there's an element of, sounds a little sketchy or crazy, that I clearly felt I cannot do this, that this is trespassing, that there are still living spirits, people, this is still, it's still alive there. People are still alive there in spirit, if not in flesh. And to traipse over their homes, their lives, their history, as though it's a tourist. Anyhow, so I listened to that feeling and didn't do it. I wouldn't go with my friends to this. Um, but it tends to leave a certain kind of solitude or isolation from all that you've been talking about in terms of when there's a choice to not attend to any of this.
Mhm.
And yet inside there's pain.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, can I respond a little bit to you, David? Is that okay? Okay. Thank you for sharing. And three things that came to me as you were talking. One was I was in a gathering one time with a Muskogee elder, and he said, "Why is it that you settlers just move all over the country all the time? Your families are all spread out over the country and you're all moving all the time. You can't just settle somewhere. If you're going to be settlers, just settle down." And that was really, it's funny, but it's also, he really hit a chord for me because that is what we do. Our families are divided and split up and moving all over all the time. We can't put roots down here. And I think this is part of what you mentioned about the wound of the families fracturing, and we're still carrying around these wounds, right? The second thing was I feel you with the cognitive dissonance about owning land, and there are many things happening now around land back, rematriation, and land tax programs that are being developed to address that. And there's a page on my website that has all the resources I know about. And I would just invite you to explore that if you're interested, because the solutions are already here for that dynamic, and we can plug in and participate. And then I also just wanted to affirm that, yeah, it's very lonely on this path sometimes because it's counterculture, it counters everything that we've been trained to do. But I'm taking a lot of heart lately because I'm finding that people want the desire is building to be in this kind of conversation. And you're lucky that you have a community here where you can say that, because you're going to find that you are less alone than you think, I believe. So thank you. And who would like to share next?
Thanks, Hillary, and David. Thank you for your comments. Always heartfelt and provocative. David Gibson, I think you're next, and then Deanna. There you go, David. Oops. Click your mute again, and you'll be good. There you go.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I could tell stories for a while, but I'll try to keep it brief. So the thing that strikes me as we're having this conversation, and this comes out of my own experience working in Haiti and working in a number of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And I wonder about this for myself and for others involved in this work. And as I look around at the faces here, at least by our physical appearance, most of us are white, or from a European background. Oddly, I had some Native American blood, which is hard to see through the English and the Scots Irish. But so my question or my issue is, when others question us or when we question ourselves, how much of this work is about making ourselves feel better? And how much of it is really about fixing this multi-generational problem? Haiti is called America's Africa because it's very easy and convenient to visit and do mission work or do social justice work. And I actually had to leave a group that I was involved in doing some public health work, doing some water and sanitation, some electricity, supporting students and getting an education. I had to leave that group because I felt like it had become more about them making themselves feel better as opposed to creating lasting impact.
Mhm.
and I struggle with the fact that, I have ancestors that were officers in the Civil War on the Confederate side. I worked in Africa and have been to the slave forts in Ghana, where you walk through the door of no return, and the choice is you drown in the sea, you stay in the dungeon, or you get on the slave ship. And as a white Southern American, that was tears are hard for me, but the tears flowed that day. And so I guess the big question that I've got, and I'm definitely going to read your book and engage on your website, Hillary. One of the frustrations I have right now is I'm not hearing Biden's voice. I'm not hearing Obama's or Clinton's voice. I'm not hearing the voices of all these leaders. Many of them are silent. And I don't know that I want them to do anything. I just want to hear their voice. And so to connect with your resources kind of gives me a sense of hope. But just I'll throw that question out there. How much of this is about real repair, and how much of it is about just nurturing ourselves?
Right. Oh, that is such a good question. Thank you, David. I've been working now for 5 years with groups of white people on these issues. We go through a 9-month circle together every year. And one of the things that we do in the arc of that circle is that we do ritualized apology and forgiveness. And this was taught to us by an Oglala Lakota elder named Basil Braveheart. And part of that, it basically consists of writing a prayer and burning it in a ritual. And that prayer focuses on apology and forgiveness. And the reason that we have made this a key part of this work is so that when we move into the reparative actions and the humanitarian work and the reparations and whatever form that takes, we have to be doing it from a place that's clean. Because if we move into that reparative work from a place of guilt, white guilt, or white saviorism, we're just going to create more harm. It's just going to be more of the same. And also those prayer letters are private. They are never read aloud. They are not published. They are not shared. They're not posted online, because it's a prayer between each individual and the divine, whatever form that takes. That is the medicine that helps clean us out and prepare us to step forward in a way that can really be of service. And it's easy to get it wrong when we try to step into action without doing the spiritual work underneath it all. It's easy to, create more havoc. And that's
Hillary,
just,
I assume that process, that 9-month process, is something that's clear and available on your website.
yeah. If you go to the events page on my website, there's a link to Rekindling Ancestral Memory. That's what it's called. And the circle is full, but we will open it up again for registration in like August or September. So you could even send me an email, and then I can make sure that you get a notice when the registration opens. You can email me on my website. And yeah,
That sounds like
we
something I need.
We love to have men with us. We hardly ever have any men, but we need men in this work, right? Men are necessary, and men stepping into that sacred masculine energy too. So yeah, please do.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Hillary. Wonderful. Great question and comments. My friend Deanna from Taos on the land in New Mexico. Oh, you're still muted. You're still muted there.
Sorry. Thank you, Geoff. Yeah, I'm on northern Tiwa land here at the base of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. So I'm your neighbor, Hillary.
Hi.
And I'm feeling very teary from everything people have shared. Thank you so much. I'm feeling everybody's hearts. So I am Puerto Rican, 14th generation Puerto Rican, was raised in Southern California from the age of 1 in a very white neighborhood. I passed until I was in my 30s. And then I started to realize that I was filled with internalized racism. And I've been unpacking that now for 30 years and have gotten very deeply into different kinds of racial and ethnic work. So I have a comment on what somebody said about how people of color need the healing more than we white people do. I always balk when I hear that from white people. We have our communities. We have our cultures. We have our unity and our solidarity. We have so many ways that we have been healing and surviving all these years in racial structures. What I need, and I know this from lots of other friends who are people of color, is we just need the white people to do their work. Do your work, please.
Yeah.
Please. And I have been in so many spaces that are around racial work that are us, people of color, doing our work. This might be the first time I've been in one that's for white people. So, Hillary, I deeply honor this work that you're doing. I've been hearing about you for a couple of years from my dear friend Barbara Becker, who's here.
Oh, hi, Barbara.
Yeah, and I'm excited and thrilled and so grateful that you are doing this work and that it's reaching people. But yeah, that's the heart plea. Like, we don't need your white saviorism. We need for you to deal with your shit, okay? Like, go through your grief, please. Unpack what's going on with you and what your ancestry was and how that makes you feel, because that is the only way that the racial structure, the racism structures are going to be dismantled. I don't know any other way.
Thank you, Diana. That's, you know what,
Yes.
that is a call that I have heard as well I've heard it from Latina friends, I've heard it from Indigenous friends, I've heard it from Black friends, I've heard it from Filipina friends too. I've heard it from all those communities. And that is one of the reasons that I wrote this book, because I started to realize that, you know, white silence and our reluctance to do our own work is like the linchpin to the whole thing. Like, if we just start talking about it and end our silence, it could unravel. It could start to shift, you know? So thank you. You're affirming what I have heard from many communities as well. Yeah.
Great, great. Thank you, Deanna. I was hoping you would share. I was looking forward to what you had to say. And Jacqueline, I want to get to you, but if I could just insert here first, and you know, what everyone just said, I completely agree with. In my local Zen center here in Boulder, we went through a year-plus long session based on Ruth King's book and Ruth King's teaching, and it was really powerful. But there's such resistance, as most everyone here knows. In Zen Peacemakers, we do bearing witness retreats at places of unspeakable human horror. We've been going to Auschwitz now for approaching 30 years. We gather with Lakota elders in the Black Hills or elsewhere in Wyoming and Montana every summer. And for the last handful of years, we've done a bearing witness to racism retreat in Alabama, in Selma and Montgomery and Birmingham. And I've, again, you know, friends of mine who are really well-meaning, and they've got good hearts, but there's a resistance with white people around this, and it comes out sometimes in the words, "I'm not going to feel guilty about that. I didn't do it. I said it earlier, but but I left out the, I'm not going to feel guilty about it part. And I don't want to go off into a tangent because this is not my presentation, but our approach to bearing witness is not about going there to feel guilty. It's not about that. It's going there to be a human being and to be still and just face what happened and listen and then continue to listen. But it's not about fixing anything. So there's kind of a backdrop of that in this. Jacqueline, I want to go on to you. Nice to see you from Northern California.
Nice
So,
to see you too, Geoff.
yeah.
Yeah, from Northern California. Yeah, I just am so moved and so appreciative of the courage, Hillary, that you have to turn and face this. And it's so synchronistic because I write a monthly newsletter, and this morning I've been like in what can I do this of what's going on in my country, and just thinking nothing coming up. And this morning I realized is that I've been focusing on what other people have done and doing the whole blame thing that I'm seeing at the highest level now. I'm doing that. I'm blaming Trump. I'm blaming the oil companies. I'm blaming greedy corporations while I buy their products, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
And it's so it's so synchronistic because I'm going through my own personal reckoning right now with how I contribute to I created this. I contributed and I continue to contribute. And it's daunting how many ways I continue to contribute to the dysfunction of the system. Um, uh, and I've lived for over 45 years on Miwok property here, and I thought many times about, well, what does that mean? You know, that I'm living on stolen property, and to date, the best I could come up with is that I am going to husband this property in a way that honors the land. And that is the best I can do at this point, because I don't know that I could give it to somebody, or I don't know that that would do any good, but that I feel like I'm a steward of this land. And one other thing I wanted to say is that I'm Jewish. My people came over in the late 1800s. We have been in diaspora for 5,000 years. We have uh, um, lived in other people's spaces for that long. So living in other people's spaces is endemic to being Jewish, and that's just the way it is. Our homeland was gone for, without getting into details, and so we've been living, and although my people didn't come here and colonize, we have been benefiting from it, and we've acculturated, and and living like scavengers off of that work that was done. So because I also had that same attitude. Well, my people didn't do it, but we've been living like scavengers off of this, and we've found ways to make that work. And this whole how to deal with it is very complex because of I still need to live, and I still need my daughter to have clothing, and and so anyway, that's I'm very grateful for this discussion and for the whole impulse to take it personally, for each one of us to take it personally, what our piece of this problem that is created is. So thank
Mm.
you for that, Hillary. And I'm going to be
Um,
checking out your work.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And I want to ask you too, something came to me while you were talking. Can I share that with you?
Mhm.
About what you said about living on Miwok land. This is something in my own story that has been so important. And that is, so there's the realization that we're all living on stolen land, right? That we've all participated in gentrification because these systems have pushed Indigenous people off their land and allowed us to occupy them, right? There's that realization. And then there's the, what can you do about it, right? And for a long time, I was paralyzed by that. And like, I have no idea what to do because I have to live. I need a house to live in, you know? But what emerged for me over time was it's so critical to build relationships with Indigenous peoples on the land where you live. That is so valuable. And so I would just throw that out there as a potential, idea that doing the work to build those relationships, to find out who are they, what organizations are they leading, what is the critical work that they are invested in, that they care about. And then if you can, showing up and sitting very humbly and very quietly with an inquiry about how, if at all, can I help you? And that's a question that was taught to me by a Dene scholar and artist named Lila June Johnston. She's the one who first taught me that question. And it's kind of like a living inquiry. It's a question that you don't even necessarily have to ask out loud. But if you can go and sit in those spaces and just embody that question and listen, then there is so much good that can come out of that. Because there are asks being made of us in many cases, there are ways that we are being asked to step forward, and it might be different than what we expect. Many times I've been asked to do things by the Indigenous community here that I wouldn't have thought that they would want me to do, but it's that process of listening that enables that healing to happen. So I can't recommend that practice highly enough for everybody.
I want to just say that I have done some of that looking, unfortunately, in this, the Miwoks have been like almost completely decimated by smallpox and by colonization. And I hunted for, and their language, I wanted to know more about their language. And it's like there's about 2 or 3 people or something. It's very small, but I will go further in and see if I could find those 2 or 3 people and do that.
Right. And in some cases, people have been displaced. So it could be that the Indigenous community nearer you is not made up of Miwok people anymore. It could be that it's made up of Cherokee people and, Choctaw people and Lakota people. I mean, because there's been so much displacement, but that's
Mhm.
okay too,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Louise, hello.
Hello. My goodness. This is such a powerful discussion. I'm so moved to be in a group of other white-bodied appearing people who are looking inward and seeking to grieve and mourn and undo this harm that is in ourselves and in the world that our ancestors have created in the world around us. And I raised my hand because I wanted to say that I think I have like a dozen things I want to say. I live in Northern California also, and I have, Jacqueline, I could talk with you about some Miwok leads for you. I would be happy to do that offline. Really, there's a lot going on in that community. But I wanted to say this seems like such a grim time in the world. But it's really a time of opening. And I think this discussion is an example of it. The groups that Hillary and I are involved with, of other people who are writing books about completely different stories. There's two Jewish authors who are writing about their Rebecca Claren's book, The Cost of Free Land. Write that in the chat. Her ancestors immigrated from the Ukraine area in the mid 1800s, and she has an amazing story to tell about that. But it's just a time when there's a lot of opening going on, and we are part of it. And I would really encourage this group to have more sessions on this subject, because it seems like you're really onto it, and maybe you can even do some healing work within these sessions. So all power to everyone here. And I hope we're going to get to the topic of reparations.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Should we share a little bit about that now?
Let's do, but Louisa, I want to point out that Jacqueline put her email address in the chat.
Oh,
so-
good. I'll connect with you, Jacqueline.
Yeah, be sure to copy it because it goes away once we turn off the Zoom. So
Right, I remember. Yeah.
So yes, Hillary, again, we touched on this briefly before, and you had referred to institutional versus personal reparations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really interested in this topic. Given the climate right now, I'm not all that hopeful, but maybe I'm missing something. So,
Yeah. Oh, I know. I mean, this conversation was stunted even before this administration. So now I can't imagine. But yeah, there have been, municipal and state level and federal initiatives toward reparations going for a long time. And, as we know, we're in kind of a dysfunctional way right now with our systems of governance. And so, whenever I think about, or I hear people talk about reparations, one of the most common, like the surface level reaction that happens very commonly is, oh, well, we'll never be able to figure out how to do it. It's just too hard. How will we ever land on a solution? How will we ever agree? Right. And it's almost like it's this impossible puzzle that's the story we've told ourselves in white culture, that it's just impossible, that it's too big, it's too overwhelming, it can never happen, right? But the truth is, it can happen from the inside out. And there's a way that I have started working with that I call personal reparations plans. And everything that we've talked about here with all of this grieving, this crying, this looking at very difficult things and choosing to stay with it, even though it's hard, this building relationships with communities of color, all of these things that have been part of the conversation today, the ritualized apology and forgiveness, they can all flow into a process of making personal reparations. And there is a little guide that I wrote up that Geoff has that he is going to share with you. I may have already put it in the chat. I don't know. Or
yes, Hillary, it's in the chat, but you'll need to scroll back towards the beginning of the chat. There's a number of resources.
Yeah. And so it's basically just, it's a process of moving from that place within that, like Geoff mentioned, is one with all of our relatives here on this planet, all of our relations, moving from that place of oneness, moving from a desire for healing, moving from your heart. It's really a heart-based process. And then identifying a plan and writing it down and saying, what am I going to do in the next week, in the next month, in the next 6 months, in the next year? And it can be very helpful to have a buddy, like Louise and Jacqueline may have a buddy connection here where it's like, we need each other. We need to walk beside each other and help each other do this because it's hard. And saying things like, for example, I'm going to, donate $25 a month to a land back program every month. I'm going to put it on a recurring donation on my credit card. Or I am going to stop giving all of my friends and family birthday presents, Hanukkah presents, Christmas presents, because we don't need anything else. We've already got too much stuff, all of us. Instead, I'm going to give money to a midwifery program that's led by Black women. Or I'm going to give into a guaranteed income program for Black families who are living in poverty in the South. Or I'm going to I'm going to give into some kind of land rematriation program. And making choices with our time, our energy, and our money to say, I am committed to this. And it's not going to be a one-time thing. It's going to be ongoing. It's going to be throughout the year, and it's going to be year after year until it becomes part of my life. It's just it's a way of life. And that's accessible to all of us, all of us who have, the capacity to even sit on a Zoom call like this. If we're able to be on a Zoom call, we've got enough free time and resource and support around us to be able to develop a reparations plan. And I wanted to mention too, maybe, I don't know, is this a good time to mention the Oak Flat, or should we?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, because this ties in with the personal reparations plan. So potentially, if you choose, there is a very important issue going on where I live in Arizona, outside Phoenix. There's a sacred site called Oak Flat in English. That's the English name, where the Apache people have been doing their womanhood ceremony for a long time. And it is a beautiful space with flowing water and rocks and trees. And there's a group called Apache Stronghold that it was formed several years ago by the Nosey family. Winsler Nosey Sr. is kind of, the leader. He's the one that's out front the most often, although there are many women behind him who are also leading the way in his family. And the issue at stake at Oak Flat is that a foreign mining corporation was given permission through the back door by Senator John McCain to go in and mine that site for copper. And the process of that mining would completely destroy the site. I've heard Dr. Nosey say that it would be a murder. It would be a murder because that site is a living being that is specifically connected with the sacred feminine for them. So if that foreign mining company is allowed to go in and do that, it will be a complete and utter destruction. And it would also waste millions of gallons of water, which of course we need in Arizona. So, so they have been pushing back on this through the courts for a long time. And they have now taken it as an appeal to the Supreme Court, and they're waiting to hear whether the Supreme Court will take this case. And they have an annual prayer run and walk where it's a very interfaith movement that they run, the Apache Stronghold runs. And I mean, the Indigenous community that I am part of up here, that I do community organizing with, has long supported Apache Stronghold, and they support us. So we are in relation with each other. And so it came to my attention recently that Louise and Joanne were going to be on this call, and that they would like to share a little bit about a Buddhist delegation that is going to take part in this prayer run with Apache Stronghold. So I'm going to invite, I don't know, I guess both of you, or either, since you're both here, or if Joanne wants to talk about it. Is Joanne still here?
I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you, Mary.
Because think of this when Joanne shares about this, think of this in the context of a personal reparations plan. This is just one example of many, many that you could plug into a personal reparations plan to become part of your action moving forward. And then I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I've really, really appreciated everything this morning. I feel like I'm still very new on this journey, and in part due to the influence of dear Louise. Yeah, I feel like I've really gained a lot this morning. So thanks to the invitation of a dear Mennonite friend, who is involved with the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, I became involved with organizing a Buddhist delegation for the annual prayer run at Oak Flat. And we are a small but mighty delegation right now. We are 6 Buddhist practitioners from California, Arizona, and Minnesota. I believe that's the 3 states that we're from. And we welcome more folks to join us. And if you're interested, I will put the application link in the chat. They would very much appreciate if you are interested in submitting an application by Friday, because there is an orientation process. The run occurs from February 20th to the 23rd. You don't have to be there for the entire time. It starts on Thursday around 4 and closes around, I think, 1 or 2 on Sunday. And it is, we as a delegation will be representatives of the Arizona Faith Network and the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. And in the past, there have been other Christian people there in solidarity with the Apache Stronghold. And this will be the first time there'll be an official Buddhist delegation. So let me put this into chat. There's a wonderful organizer that is that works for the coalition. Their name is Do Hoyer, and Do has been orienting us to the coalition's work and ways of working with and partnering with Indigenous people and communities. The Doctrine of Discovery, there's a wonderful, I recommend watching this webinar, and I think someone dropped the link in chat. We organized a webinar about a month ago with Sarah Augustine, who is the executive director of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, where she talks at length about the doctrine and the impact it's had on everything in our lives, and the oppression of especially Indigenous people and African people from Africa. So if that link isn't in there, and I really recommend looking at their website too, the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. I can drop that in there. There's a flyer for the event. I can drop that into chat as well for the prayer run. So what we will do is bear witness and deepen our understanding of what the Apache Stronghold are doing and what the community there is facing, and how we can partner and build more Buddhist support for their effort to save their sacred land. So in brief, that's what we'll do.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you for sharing. And did you want to add anything, Louise?
Oh, I am just trying to manage my presence on this. I'm trying to find the link so I could send it to you, to this wonderful discussion, because what's special about this for me, Joanne and I are both practitioners in the Plum Village tradition of Buddhism, and we are very interested in getting our community engaged in these things, because we do practice engaged Buddhism, and we thought so. The beautiful video shows a monk and Sarah Augustine, who is Tewa descended, speaking together about the doctrine of discovery. And if you let me, I'll keep searching for it and put it up for you. I just
Have it here.
I just feel like this is one of those special moments when people who have the ability to do something together are together, and we can talk about it. And I'd like to hear what other folks in the meeting have to say.
I saw that someone asked in the chat about the doctrine of discovery, but then we also have a couple people with their hands up. So what should we do, Geoff?
We've got just a few more minutes. I think I'm not seeing the hands.
It looks like Daniel.
Daniel, we just have, if you keep it brief, go ahead and unmute and share your comment. Oh, and then I see Rerin as well too.
Yep. Thank you so much. And certainly I will keep it brief. I wanted to say thank you. It's my very first time here. Can you hear me okay? Or yeah.
Very well.
Okay, thanks. And please excuse me for being off video at the moment. Something that I had found for my family is that when my grandfathers years ago had shared with me that there had been at least one slave that some of his ancestors had owned. And I've been thinking to try and go back, find any documentation, maybe reach out to that family if I can find them. And I just, for this to come right now, I'm so very grateful for. And I wanted to say thank you to each of you. And I hope to join you again. It's my first time here. But this is such important work. And frankly, I didn't know that it existed.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
I wish you good luck on that
Thank
journey.
you.
Yeah.
Rerin, I think we have a couple minutes for you.
Yeah, I would just like more information because I think I can get a local group going here to join you guys. Because we are looking right now for something that we can do, and we all feel, we've done a video here about local Indigenous people here, and for just for people to understand that this is actually, there is something happening here, and there are people who are still descendants, because for a long time it has been said there's nobody here anymore, but that's not true. They're still here. So yeah, we want to do something. Thank you. And if Geoff, could you also put all these links into an email? That would be very helpful.
Yes, Rerin, we always follow up with a survey, and we'll include the chat file this time.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, we are coming close to the end of our time here. If anyone else has a question or a comment or something to share, we're dwindling down a little bit in our numbers, but still a good group.
So
Hillary?
I'm not sure who asked about the doctrine of discovery, but would that be an okay thing to mention in the last couple minutes?
Of course, please do. And
I don't know if that person is still here, but I just can't emphasize strongly enough how important it is to learn about the doctrine of discovery. It is so critical to everything that we are seeing right now. It stems from a bunch of papal bulls that were issued in the 1500s, and basically created a false legal justification for European imperialism all over the world. And so many of the things that we are seeing today, the root can be found in the doctrine of discovery. So I highly recommend the coalition to dismantle the doctrine of discovery that was mentioned. I also recommend Sarah Augustine's books. There's a book by Stephen Newcomb. There's a book by Sherry Mitchell. There's a book by Mark Charles and Sung Chung Ra, who all of these books are excellent resources to understand that doctrine is still alive and is still playing out today in our legal system. It has a huge impact on all of us, even if we've never heard about it. So I just want to strongly encourage And there's a page on my website that has everything I know about for those links and those titles.
Perfect. Well, that's a very nice way for us to wrap up. Once again, Hillary, thank you so much for sharing. I do a lot of these. I think our chat is more lively than anyone I've ever seen. So I think that's good feedback for you already.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate you all and all of your earnest inquiry here and your attention and your heart. So thank you.
And if you can help support Zen Peacemakers by donating, that is always appreciated. We offer all of this for free, but it takes some energy to put it on. So thank you so much. And do watch for the survey that comes, and I'll do my best to save the chat into that. So, okay, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
good
you.
Wednesday.
Thank you.
Stay safe.